The candle flickered violently, throwing long, jagged shadows across the Blackridge estate's grand hallway, as though the very walls were quivering with anticipation. Melinda Ashbury froze in the doorway, the polished marble cold beneath her trembling fingers. She had expected whispers, stares, perhaps scorn. She had not expected silence so thick it pressed against her chest like a living thing. And then, a shadow detached itself from the far end of the hall, a man, tall, immovable, and suffused with authority, whose eyes held a storm she could not yet name. "You may enter," he said, voice low, measured, yet holding the weight of command. Every syllable brushed against her, daring her to falter. Melinda's heart thumped painfully, a wild rhythm that seemed too loud in the stillness. She took a tentative step forward, the rustle of her skirts loud in the quiet, and met the Duke's gaze. Elias Hawthorne, the man whispered about in hushed tones across every salon and ballroom, the Duke they called the Beast, looked at her as though he could see every secret she had buried, every misstep she feared the world would unearth. She swallowed, tasting the metallic tang of fear, yet a strange current of curiosity rippled beneath it. The rumors, the warnings, the anxiety she had carried for weeks, they all collided in that instant. She had entered this marriage expecting judgment, hostility, and ruin. She had prepared herself for cold glances, for the icy distance of a husband who resented the obligation society had thrust upon him. And yet, here he stood, immovable yet protective, the very embodiment of danger shielding her from the unknown. "Why are you staring like that?" he asked, almost softly, and Melinda felt the heat rise to her cheeks. His scrutiny was intimate, almost intrusive, yet not cruel. She wanted to retreat, to vanish into herself, but curiosity anchored her feet. The first moments were silent, filled with a tension that neither of them acknowledged but both felt. Candles trembled in their holders, as if even the light itself feared breaking the fragile cocoon around them. Melinda tried to imagine the life that awaited her, the endless halls of Blackridge, the unyielding gaze of a husband she had only just met. She had rehearsed her politeness, her humility, her submission, but all rehearsals melted in the presence of Elias Hawthorne. She sensed something in him that the world never showed, vulnerability hidden beneath a fortress of dread, a careful balance of power and restraint. He stepped closer, the faint scent of bergamot brushing past her senses, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the faint tremble of his presence and the rapid thrum of her own heartbeat. "You need not fear me," he said, and the words struck her, not with comfort, but with the startling weight of truth. In a world that had judged her, condemned her, and plotted her humiliation, here was a man who seemed determined to protect her, even before knowing her fully. Yet, even as relief washed briefly over her, suspicion lingered. Why? Why shield her, a stranger bound by duty, from the inevitable whispers? His eyes, dark and unreadable, held secrets, scars, and a history she could not yet imagine. And that was the danger, the pull, the threat, and the inexplicable allure of the unknown that danced at the edge of every stolen glance. The moment stretched, taut as a drawn bowstring, until a sharp knock shattered the fragile calm. A servant appeared, voice trembling. "Your Grace, dinner is served," she said, but her eyes darted toward Melinda as though expecting a storm to erupt. The Duke's lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if amused by the tension yet determined to maintain control. Melinda's chest tightened. She had entered Blackridge expecting to be broken, judged, and diminished. Instead, she found herself under the gaze of a man feared more than admired, yet who had already become her unexpected protector. She could not deny the flutter of fear and fascination intertwining inside her. "Come," he commanded softly, and she followed, skirts rustling, every step echoing in the hall. The shadows shifted, the candles whispered, and in that haunted, gilded space, Melinda realized her life had changed in an instant. The question pressed against her thoughts relentlessly: could a man feared by all truly be the one to shield her heart? And with that, the first thread of a dangerous, intoxicating connection had been woven, fragile yet electric, ready to pull them both into a world of scandal, secrecy, and the slow-burning fire of forbidden desire. The sound of her own breathing startled Melinda as she descended the sweeping staircase, each step echoing in the cavernous hall. Guests had begun to arrive for the evening gathering, a glittering parade of silk, diamonds, and judgment. She had prepared herself for whispers, for the cruel amusement of strangers, yet nothing could have readied her for the way the Duke's presence shifted the room. Elias Hawthorne stood at the base of the stairs, his posture rigid, eyes scanning the crowd as if daring anyone to challenge him, and, by extension, her. A subtle nod from him sent a ripple through the assembled guests. Conversations faltered. Laughter dipped into awkward silence. Melinda felt heat rise in her cheeks, caught between the terror of exposure and the strange, thrilling relief of having an unexpected protector. Her pulse hammered against her ribs as she followed his lead, moving through the room with the Duke's silent authority smoothing the path before her. Yet, not all eyes were friendly. Lady Winthrop, draped in emerald satin, arched a brow and whispered something sharp enough to sting, though Melinda could not catch the words. The Duke's hand brushed lightly against her elbow, steadying her, a gesture so intimate it made her heart lurch. "Do not listen," he murmured, low enough for only her to hear. "They do not matter." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the calm command in his voice, but doubt coiled inside her. What did it mean, this protection? Why would a man so feared, so distant, concern himself with her comfort? And yet, every subtle glance, every carefully placed word, suggested that beneath the legend of the beast lay a man capable of loyalty and something else, something far more dangerous than she dared name. Dinner was a tense dance of etiquette and scrutiny. Melinda sipped her tea, noting the way the Duke's fingers lightly touched hers as he passed her a dish, the world narrowing to that shared contact. His gaze never left her, a tether she could neither resist nor fully understand. Across the table, whispers danced, servants shuffled nervously, but Elias remained a bulwark, silent and unyielding, shielding her with a presence that demanded attention. Later, as the evening waned and candles burned low, Elias led her to a small sitting room, away from prying eyes. The walls were lined with books, and the air smelled of musk and old parchment. He gestured toward a seat, and she sank into it, heart still racing. "Why are you so different from the world's perception of you?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. His expression darkened, shadows playing across his chiseled features. "Because the world only sees what it wants to see," he said. "And I am done allowing it to decide who is worthy, including you." Melinda's breath caught. She had entered this marriage expecting judgment and humiliation. Instead, she found herself in the presence of a man who saw beyond appearances, who understood the precariousness of her world, and who, without explanation, chose to defend her. And in that quiet, candlelit room, the question pressed unrelentingly against her thoughts: could she truly allow herself to rely on him, when doing so risked both her heart and her reputation? The answer hung in the air, heavy with promise and danger, as the first spark of trust, and something far more intoxicating, ignited between them. The scream tore through the Blackridge estate like a blade, slicing the quiet of the night. Melinda's heart seized in her chest as she raced toward the source, skirts whipping around her ankles, fear pounding like a drum in her head. She rounded the corner of the grand hallway and froze. There, in the dim glow of a candelabra, a figure, masked, threatening, held a letter aloft, its edges burned, the words nearly illegible. Elias was already there, stepping between her and the intruder, his eyes dark with fury. "Step back," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous, carrying the weight of authority that demanded obedience. The figure hesitated, and Melinda realized with a shock that the letter contained more than threats. It hinted at scandal, at secrets from her past that, if revealed, could ruin everything. "What is he doing here?" she whispered, clutching the folds of her gown. Her voice trembled despite the fire in her chest. Elias's hand brushed hers briefly, grounding her. "A test," he said, eyes never leaving the intruder. "Society would love nothing more than to see you fall." The intruder's mask slipped, revealing a familiar face twisted in hatred. One of the Duke's distant cousins, known for scheming, now standing as the embodiment of the peril Melinda had anticipated since her arrival. The thought sent shivers crawling up her spine. And yet, amid the terror, a strange thrill pulsed. Elias's presence, solid and protective, made the danger feel almost bearable. Moments later, the cousin fled, cursing under his breath, and Elias exhaled, tension sliding from his shoulders. He turned to her, expression softening, and for the first time, the hardness around his eyes gave way to something warmer. "Are you unharmed?" he asked, voice rough with concern. Melinda nodded, though her legs threatened to buckle. I think so," she stammered, the adrenaline still hammering in her veins. She wanted to retreat, to hide in the corner of some quiet room and pretend the world was safe. But Elias, silent yet insistent, guided her to the sitting room where the fire crackled, flames casting flickering shadows on the walls. "You cannot hide forever," he said, taking a seat opposite her. "Nor should you. You have more strength than you believe." She looked at him, this man who carried the weight of a duke's expectations and a brother's death, yet still had room for concern, for her. "Why do you care?" she asked, the words spilling out before she could temper them. "Why protect me when everyone else would see me humiliated?" He leaned forward, gaze intense. "Because you are not like them. You do not seek to manipulate, to destroy, to take what is not yours. And because," he paused, the silence stretching, fraught with meaning, "I will not allow you to be broken by people who do not deserve a second thought." Melinda felt something stir within her, a fragile thread of trust, mixed with awe, and, she admitted silently, something more dangerous. Desire. Something forbidden, yet undeniable. And yet, she could not forget the stakes. Every whispered rumor, every slight glance in the ballroom, was a reminder of the precarious position she occupied. If she gave herself to him fully, if she let herself hope, what would happen when the world inevitably struck back? The clock chimed midnight, echoing in the high-ceilinged room. Melinda shivered, partly from the chill, partly from the tension coiling tight inside her. Elias's eyes softened as he noted her unease. "We will face them together," he said. "And I promise, no one will harm you if I can prevent it." She wanted to believe him. Part of her did. But the other part, the part that had braced for humiliation all her life, remained wary. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself to feel anything other than fear? As she sat there, the firelight reflecting in her eyes, she realized that her life had irrevocably changed. The Duke of Blackridge was no longer just her husband by title. He was her shield, her challenge, and, terrifyingly, the one person she could not imagine a life without. And somewhere in that realization, in the tension of unspoken words and stolen glances, the first sparks of something far more dangerous than scandal ignited, the undeniable pull of desire, of connection, and of love that neither of them had expected, but could not ignore. A carriage wheel screeched against the cobblestones, jolting Melinda awake. The dawn mist clung to her skirts as she stumbled from the carriage, heart hammering. The Blackridge estate loomed before her, massive and imposing, every shadow threatening judgment. She had thought the night behind her would bring reprieve, but now, standing at the threshold, she realized the real trial was only beginning. Elias was there, his presence cutting through the fog like a blade of certainty. He did not smile, did not offer comfort. Instead, his eyes, storm-dark and unreadable, studied her as if measuring her worth against some invisible scale. "Step inside," he commanded, voice low, deliberate. Melinda obeyed, swallowing the tremor in her throat. The grandeur of the entry hall assaulted her senses, polished marble floors reflecting glimmers of torchlight, tapestries whispering centuries of legacy, and the scent of polished oak mingled with faint perfume of distant flowers. She felt the weight of every eye upon her, though no one was yet visible. The servants moved with silent efficiency, glancing at her with curiosity barely masked as duty. Every whispered footstep seemed amplified, every soft rustle of fabric a subtle judgment. Melinda clutched her reticule, heart pounding, realizing that here, at the estate of her feared husband, the social gauntlet had already begun. Elias led her through the halls, each step measured, deliberate, his hand brushing hers only occasionally, a fleeting contact that left her skin tingling. "You must present yourself," he said finally, stopping before a grand salon where light spilled through towering windows, illuminating faces she had yet to know. "They will test you. Watch closely. Speak carefully. And above all, observe." She nodded, swallowing hard, wishing fervently that the world would simply leave her be. Yet, as she stepped forward, she caught the glance of Lady Montague, sharp-eyed and calculating, whose lips curved in a faint, knowing smirk. Melinda felt the old familiar dread coil in her stomach. Gossip, she realized, would be her constant companion here. Every misstep would be noted, dissected, and whispered about. Still, Elias's gaze remained fixed on her, unyielding, almost possessive. "Remember," he murmured, voice a shadow in her ear, "I will not allow them to break you." It was more than a promise, it was a challenge. He was staking himself on her ability to navigate this world, and in doing so, he had bound her to him in ways she did not yet understand. The first confrontation came swiftly. A cousin, eager to display loyalty to the household hierarchy, approached with a forced smile and subtle venom in his words. "I hear you have spent some unsanctioned time in London," he said, letting the comment hang. Melinda's pulse raced. Exposure, ruin, social death, the words threatened to suffocate her. Before she could answer, Elias stepped forward, calm yet commanding. "I assure you, my wife conducts herself with the utmost propriety," he said, voice sharp, slicing through the air like steel. The cousin's lips tightened, caught between indignation and fear. Melinda's stomach fluttered, not from relief, but from the realization that Elias's defense was more than protection, it was recognition, validation, and something unspoken, intimate. As the day wore on, she discovered the subtle perils of Blackridge society, whispered innuendo, veiled insults, and the constant weight of expectation. Yet, with every challenge, Elias's presence became her anchor. Moments alone in the library, in the gardens, or by the drawing-room fire, allowed brief glimpses of vulnerability, fleeting confessions, and stolen touches that ignited an unspoken longing between them. That evening, as candlelight flickered against polished walls, Elias finally spoke in a tone that blended warning with intrigue. "You are not merely a guest in this house, Melinda. You are a part of it. And that means understanding the rules before you can bend them." Her lips parted, words caught in the haze of desire and fear. Could she trust him completely? Could she navigate the treacherous currents of this life without losing herself? Every instinct screamed caution, but every glance at the Duke of Blackridge stirred a dangerous, thrilling hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she was no longer alone against the storm. Outside, the wind whipped around the estate, carrying whispers from distant corners, promises of challenges yet to come. And inside, as Melinda and Elias exchanged a quiet, loaded glance, both understood the unspoken truth. In a world of whispers and judgment, trust would be their greatest weapon, and their most fragile secret. And with that, the first night of her new life closed, leaving her heart racing and her mind teetering on the precipice of desire, danger, and the uncharted depths of a forbidden connection that neither could yet name, but both could already feel. The letter burned in Melinda's hands before she even unfolded it. The seal, broken. Someone had read it. Someone had judged her without permission. Panic clawed at her chest as she glanced toward the drawing room, where the Duke's silhouette lingered by the fire, unreadable. She had thought herself careful, invisible, safe, but now the fragile illusion of security shattered like glass beneath her fingers. Elias stepped forward, his presence magnetic and terrifying at once. Who? His voice was low, controlled, but each word hit like a strike of tempered steel. Melinda's throat tightened. Could she even speak without betraying herself? I don't know, she whispered, feeling the tremor in her own voice. He took the letter from her hands, eyes scanning the contents in silence. And then, he looked at her. Not with judgment, but with something darker, something protective. No one will speak of this, he said, a promise and a command intertwined. Yet the day was far from over. At the afternoon gathering, whispers followed her like a shadow. Cousins, distant acquaintances, and even servants cast sly glances, murmuring under their breath. Melinda felt the burn of shame, the cold grip of helplessness. Every eye threatened to expose her secret, to make her fragile world collapse. Elias was near, subtly intercepting questions, diverting attention, yet she could see the tension in his jaw, the calculated control in his posture. He carried the weight of her protection with effortless authority, and something more, something that made her chest ache with longing. By evening, the estate's ball had begun, candlelight dancing over gilded walls. Melinda moved through the crowd with careful grace, every step choreographed to avoid scandal. Yet every brush of a hand, every lingering glance, brought her awareness to Elias. In the library, he caught her retreating, lips pressing into a line of concern and something almost tender. Do not let them dictate your worth, he said quietly, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. And suddenly, she felt seen, not just protected, but recognized in a way that made the air around her pulse with unspoken possibility. Later, alone on the terrace, the wind whipping around them, Melinda dared to ask the question she had kept buried. Why protect me? Elias's eyes, storm-dark and unreadable, softened just enough to reveal the truth he rarely shared. Because, he said, voice low, I do not allow injustice to go unchallenged. Not when it threatens you. His hand brushed hers, not a touch of romance yet, but a spark, an acknowledgement, a tether she could cling to amid the storm of scrutiny. The night deepened, shadows lengthening across the stone floor. Melinda felt the weight of society pressing in, the danger of exposure pressing closer. And yet, for the first time, she understood the paradox of her situation. The Duke of Blackridge, feared by all, had become her shield in a world ready to strike. Her pulse raced, her heart trembled, and she realized that survival was no longer enough. Something far more dangerous was beginning to take root: trust, desire, and the undeniable pull of a man whose protection could save her or consume her entirely. The stars above seemed indifferent to the secrets and danger below, yet in the span of one breath, Melinda felt the first stirrings of something she had never dared to hope for, something that might rewrite everything she thought she knew about love, fear, and the power of being truly seen. The sound of shattering glass tore through the quiet of the Blackridge drawing room, and Melinda froze, heart hammering as shards glinted across the polished floor. Someone had dared, someone had crossed a line she had thought unbreakable. Panic surged, her pulse drumming in her ears, and before she could move, Elias appeared, towering and deadly calm, eyes blazing like storm clouds. Stay behind me, he commanded, voice low but filled with steel, and the words ignited something fierce in her chest. Moments later, servants stumbled in, whispering of a visitor who had stormed the house with threats, letters, and rumors designed to dismantle her very reputation. Melinda's stomach twisted. Every fear she had carried into this marriage, the shame, the social ruin, the whispered condemnation, now pressed against her like a vice. She wanted to shrink away, to disappear entirely, but Elias's hand on her back anchored her, grounding her in a way she hadn't known she needed. His eyes met hers, sharp and unwavering, and she saw an unspoken vow: no one would touch her without facing him first. By candlelight, he paced the room, strategizing, plotting, planning. The Duke of Blackridge, notorious for his ruthlessness in society, became a tempest of protection, drawing invisible lines of defense around her fragile world. Melinda watched him, heart aching with a blend of fear and something more dangerous: desire. He moved with precision, his every action a statement. Her honor was his responsibility, and he would not fail. Her fingers brushed the edge of a fallen envelope, a fragment of the attack, and she realized just how vulnerable she had been, and how intensely Elias's presence shielded her. Later, in the library, the storm outside echoing the turmoil inside, he cornered her gently but firmly. "You cannot allow them to see you falter," he said, voice low, almost a growl, the tension in his frame palpable. "And yet, you must not hide who you are from me." Melinda's breath caught. Could she trust him entirely? Could she risk letting him see the trembling parts of herself she had always kept locked away? But the longing in his eyes, the quiet intensity of his gaze, made her pulse stutter, made her realize that trust could be as intoxicating as it was terrifying. The evening passed in a blur of whispered conversations and cautious glances. Every step Melinda took was measured, every word considered, but the Duke's silent watch over her never wavered. In a brief moment alone on the terrace, the wind whipping around them, she dared to ask the question she had buried beneath layers of fear: "Why do you care so much?" His gaze lingered on her face, unreadable, and for a heartbeat, she thought he might withhold the truth. Then he spoke, voice low and deliberate, "Because someone must stand for what is right. And you deserve someone to fight for you." The tension between them pulsed like the storm around the estate. Every protective gesture, every subtle deflection of insult, drew them closer, their proximity electric with unspoken emotion. Yet the threat was far from over. Rumors, letters, and the calculated whispers of society's elite hung over them like a sword, ready to fall. Melinda realized that the danger was not just outside, in the eyes of judgmental cousins or spiteful strangers, but also inside, the fragile walls of her own heart, where trust had never dared to dwell. As midnight approached, the storm raged, and the house seemed alive with threats both real and imagined. Melinda stood by the window, gazing at the lightning-etched sky, and felt a shiver run through her spine, not entirely from fear. Elias's hand found hers, gloved and warm, and the contact ignited a fire she could not name. In that instant, she understood the peril. To trust him fully was to risk her heart, yet to deny that trust was to forfeit the only protection she had ever known. And then, a shadow moved across the terrace, a figure unseen but ominous. Elias's body shifted, alert and ready, every instinct honed to danger. Melinda's pulse raced. The first true test had arrived. She could feel it, the collision of trust and fear, desire and survival, and knew that whatever followed, nothing would ever be the same. The night had turned, and with it, the delicate balance of their fragile new world hung on the edge of a knife. The sound of a gunshot ripped through the Blackridge stables, shattering the quiet of pre-dawn and sending Melinda's heart slamming against her ribs. She bolted upright in bed, sheets tangled around her, every nerve screaming. Elias was already moving, swift and silent, the dark fabric of his coat a shadow among shadows as he disappeared toward the source. Without thinking, she followed, adrenaline surging, dread and desire intertwining in a dangerous pulse. The stables were a chaos of whinnying horses and scattered straw. A masked intruder crouched near the hayloft, pistol in hand, and Elias moved like a predator, every step deliberate. "Stay back," he commanded, his voice cold, sharp, yet threaded with urgency. Melinda froze, gripping the edge of a post, stomach twisting. She knew she should obey, knew she should hide, yet the magnetic pull of him, the need to be near, to see him unguarded, overpowered caution. Seconds stretched into eternity. The intruder lunged, and Elias intercepted with fluid precision, disarming the threat with a motion that was as practiced as it was violent. Melinda's breath caught, eyes wide as the intruder fell to the ground, groaning. Elias's gaze swept the stables, assessing, calculating, and then it landed on her. His jaw tightened. "You should not be here." The words were harsh, yet there was an edge of something else, fear, relief, a tether of protective intensity that made her pulse spike in ways she didn't fully understand. Moments later, in the quiet aftermath, Elias pulled her into the library, the warmth of the fire contrasting with the chill of the morning air. "They're testing us," he said, voice low, almost a growl, eyes flicking to the window where dawn broke in pale streaks. "Someone wants to see you humiliated, or worse." Melinda shivered, not from cold, but from the weight of his words, and from the way his hand lingered over hers, grounding her. She had never felt so simultaneously small and seen, so vulnerable and protected. She dared to ask the question that had haunted her since her arrival: why me? Why care so deeply? Elias's gaze darkened, haunted. "Because you remind me of what I lost," he admitted, voice rough. "Because I will not allow another person to break what is precious without a fight." Melinda's chest tightened. There was pain there, layered beneath the fury and control, and she realized that his protective instincts were not born solely of duty, they were tethered to a vulnerability he rarely revealed. That night, as rain lashed the windows and the house creaked under the storm, they found themselves alone in the drawing room. The tension between them was electric, unspoken words suspended in the candlelight. Elias approached slowly, eyes never leaving hers, and Melinda felt her resolve waver. "You should be careful with me," he murmured, voice velvet and steel. "I do not forgive easily, or let anyone touch my heart without consequence." Her pulse raced. Could she risk trusting him entirely, when he carried so much pain? Yet the need to bridge the distance, to feel the warmth of his presence, overrode caution. The Duke's hand brushed hers, fingers trembling slightly, a rare crack in his otherwise unyielding armor. Melinda's breath caught as the intimacy of the gesture ignited something fierce and undeniable. They were caught between danger and desire, the world outside the walls threatening their fragile bubble of trust. And then, a soft creak from the hall reminded them that the threat had not vanished. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. Elias stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper meant only for her. "Trust me," he said. "I will not let them touch you." Melinda's heart thudded, caught between fear, longing, and the weight of the unspoken promise. She wanted to resist, to maintain her fragile composure, yet the pull of his protection, his closeness, was irresistible. Every instinct screamed both warning and surrender. By midnight, the storm had abated, leaving the house soaked and silent, but the tension lingered. Melinda sat by the window, fingers pressed to the glass, reflecting on the danger they had faced and the closeness they had shared. Elias stood behind her, a silent sentinel, his presence a shield and a challenge all at once. She realized the truth: every day in this house would be a battle, both against outside forces and the desires stirring within her. Then, a note slipped under the door. Her name, written in spidery ink, made her stomach plummet. Elias bent to retrieve it, eyes narrowing, and the air between them crackled with unspoken questions. The next move had been made, the game was escalating, and both of them were in its crosshairs. What waited within the folded parchment could change everything, and neither of them could predict how deep the danger, or the temptation, would run. The chandelier shattered, crystal fragments raining down as Elias barreled through the ballroom, his hand clamped over the Duke's former rival's wrist, stopping the man from lunging at Melinda. Gasps and screams rippled through the gathering, and Melinda's heart slammed against her ribs, panic and relief colliding in dizzying waves. The heat of his anger, raw and protective, radiated toward her, making her knees weak. How had she ended up here, in a world of gilded danger, where every glance and whisper carried the weight of ruin? "Stay behind me," Elias commanded, his voice slicing through the gasps of the shocked assembly. Melinda nodded, barely breathing, caught between fear and the magnetic pull of his presence. The rival struggled, and Elias's gaze flicked to hers, something unspoken passing between them, a warning, a claim, a promise. She felt it deep in her chest, the undeniable pull of the man who had been her shield, her tormentor, and the only one who truly saw her. The moment stretched unbearably. Elias's grip on the intruder tightened, the sound of his boots on the marble echoing like a drumbeat of impending reckoning. Melinda's mind raced. Who had orchestrated this? Was it revenge? A test of loyalty? Or something darker? She shivered despite the warmth of the candlelight and the heat radiating from him. She had thought she understood the world of Blackridge estate, its shadows and whispers, but this chaos reminded her how fragile their safety truly was. After what felt like hours, though only minutes had passed, the intruder was finally restrained, escorted away by the steward. Elias exhaled, running a hand down his face, and for the briefest moment, he looked vulnerable. Melinda's chest tightened. She had never seen the Duke of Blackridge so exposed. Without thinking, she stepped closer, her fingers brushing the edge of his sleeve. "Elias," she whispered, unsure whether it was caution or longing in her tone. He turned toward her, his eyes dark, fathomless, and full of emotion he rarely allowed anyone to see. "You should not have come into the ballroom," he murmured, voice rough, yet threaded with something softer, fear for her, yes, but also something else she dared not name. It was not safe. Melinda swallowed, heart hammering, the weight of his words settling over her like a storm. She wanted to argue, to insist that she could defend herself, but the intensity in his gaze silenced every protest. Instead, she allowed herself to be drawn into the pull between them, feeling the heat of his presence like a flame that could either burn or shelter her. Later, in the quiet of the Duke's private library, the room dim with only the fire's flicker illuminating his sharp features, Elias's voice broke the silence. "They are testing you. Testing us." His eyes, dark and troubled, held hers. "Someone wants to see you fail, to see me fail." Melinda's hand hovered near his, craving the anchor he always represented, but unsure if he would welcome her closeness. "Why me?" she whispered, voice trembling. "Why do they care about me so much?" Elias moved closer, the firelight dancing over his features, highlighting both the hardness and the rare softness in his eyes. "Because you matter," he said, voice low, almost a growl. "Because anyone who touches you challenges me. And I do not forgive lightly." The words reverberated in her chest, a mixture of danger and desire that made her ache. She had always thought her fragility defined her, but standing there, close to him, she felt powerful simply because he saw her, claimed her, and would fight for her. That night, the storm outside mirrored the tempest within the house. Rain battered the windows, wind moaning through the corridors, and Melinda sat by the fire, knees drawn close, as Elias entered quietly, a glass of wine in one hand and the other brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You cannot continue to hide in fear," he said softly, voice tempered by exhaustion and worry. "You must trust that not every danger comes unannounced, but not all are meant to harm." She stared at him, her chest tight with the unspoken question, could she trust him completely, allow herself to surrender to the man who had become her anchor in this storm of social intrigue? As if in answer, he stepped closer, closing the distance until their shoulders brushed. The scent of cedar and musk enveloped her, intoxicating, grounding. "Do you feel it too?" he whispered, almost trembling. "The pull, the inevitability of what we cannot name." Her breath caught. Yes. Yes, she felt it, the desire, the fear, the aching need to reach across the space between them and erase the barriers built by fear, duty, and scandal. Suddenly, a servant knocked at the door, breaking the moment, but the tension remained, crackling like static electricity in the room. Elias's eyes hardened, and he stepped protectively in front of her. "No matter what comes through that door, you will not face it alone," he promised, voice unwavering. Melinda's heart surged, caught in the swirl of relief, longing, and unspoken love. She knew then that no scandal, no threat, no whispered rumor could sever what was quietly, powerfully growing between them. Outside, the rain continued to lash against the estate, but within, in the flickering glow of candlelight and fire, Melinda and Elias were bound by trust, danger, and a yearning that neither dared speak aloud, yet both understood. The night was far from over, the threats not vanquished, but in that moment, they had found their fragile, incandescent certainty, they would face the darkness together. And as another folded note slid silently under the library door, its contents unknown, the unspoken question lingered: who was watching, and what would they risk to tear apart what had only just begun to burn? The first gunshot cracked through the night air, sharp and unexpected, and Melinda screamed, heart leaping into her throat. She dove behind the marble column in the grand hall, the echo of the shot rattling against the walls, mingling with the terrified gasps of guests who had come for a formal gathering, now caught in chaos. Her dress, once pristine, now clung damply to her skin as she pressed herself closer to the cold stone. And then she felt him, Elias, the Duke of Blackridge, move with impossible speed, shielding her with a protective sweep of his body that made her chest ache in a mixture of fear and relief. "Stay down," he barked, eyes blazing, the weight of authority and fierce determination radiating off him. The scent of his cologne, bergamot, sharp, commanding, seared her senses. She nodded, though her body trembled, caught between wanting to flee and wanting to trust him completely. The realization hit her like a blow: she had never felt this safe, even in his arms, than she did at this moment of absolute peril. The hall erupted as another shot rang out, this time shattering a crystal vase, and Melinda instinctively ducked, pressing herself against Elias's side. He whispered, low and urgent, "They've come for us. For me. For you." Her stomach churned. She had thought the worst had passed weeks ago, but danger had a way of returning, creeping back into their lives like a shadow she could never outrun. And yet, as she looked up into his storm-dark eyes, she felt an undeniable truth: no matter what came, he would not let her fall. From there, the chaos unfolded with dizzying speed. Servants screamed instructions, guests scattered, and Elias's commanding voice cut through the panic like a blade. "Move her to the library. Now." Melinda's legs carried her almost automatically, guided by his hand on the small of her back. Once inside the library, with its firelight flickering and books casting strange, dancing shadows on the walls, Elias pressed her against him. Her head rested on his chest, and she could feel the rapid beat of his heart beneath her ear. "You're safe here," he murmured, though his jaw was tense, and his eyes scanned the room for threats. "For now." And even in the midst of terror, Melinda's breath caught at the intimacy of the moment. She realized she had never truly appreciated the full depth of his presence, the absolute certainty that he was a wall against everything that threatened her. Yet the question burned hotter than the fear: how far would he go to keep her safe, and would it ever be enough? Moments later, a shadow appeared at the doorway, and Elias moved with lethal precision, intercepting the intruder. Melinda's pulse raced, the taste of copper sharp in her mouth as adrenaline surged. She wanted to scream, to run, to hide, but the truth settled over her like fire: she would not be torn from him, not tonight, not ever. The danger, the threat, only cemented what she had been feeling for months. Love was not safe, it was not gentle, it was raw, consuming, and unstoppable. And she was helplessly caught in its tide. When the intruder was finally subdued, Elias returned to her side, wiping sweat and blood from his brow. He knelt, capturing her gaze with an intensity that made her knees weaken. "Do you understand now?" he asked, voice rough, shaking with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "I will never let anyone harm you. Not in this world." Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I know. I trust you." The words were small, fragile, yet they carried a weight that made both their hearts pound in unison. The storm outside had not abated. Rain battered the windows, lightning flashing like the raw passion crackling between them. Elias's hand brushed hers, lingering, tentative, yet claiming. "You are more than whispers and scandal," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You are the only truth I see." Tears stung her eyes, but she did not pull away. Instead, she let herself lean into him, let herself be seen in a way no one else had ever truly seen her. The walls of fear, of doubt, of self-reproach, crumbled like the estate's shattered chandeliers outside. By the time dawn broke, spilling pale light across the estate's ruined gardens, Melinda and Elias stood on the terrace, wrapped in each other's arms. The world was still dangerous, still fraught with gossip, threats, and unspoken dangers, but in that embrace, nothing else mattered. The Duke's lips brushed hers gently, tender yet claiming, and she whispered against him, "I love you." He smiled then, a rare, unguarded expression that melted every fear she had carried. "And I, you," he replied. "Through every storm, through every shadow, we endure together." Behind them, the estate groaned with the morning wind, but inside, the fire that had always burned between them roared to life, untamed and unstoppable. And as the first servants began cautiously returning to the hall, bringing word of the outside world, Melinda realized the truth she had fought to deny: no threat, no scandal, no past indiscretion could ever diminish the bond they had forged. In Elias's arms, she had found not only protection but a love that demanded courage, devotion, and absolute surrender. And for the first time in her life, she felt unbreakable. Because in the Duke of Blackridge's eyes, she was not merely his wife, she was his heart, his fire, and the one soul he would defend against the world, forever. Outside, the rain washed the estate clean, but inside, Melinda and Elias remained, their bodies and hearts intertwined, knowing the trials were over, the danger survived, and a lifetime of love awaited beyond the shadows. And in that quiet dawn, one question remained lingering between them, unspoken yet understood: what would they face next, together, that they could not conquer apart?